Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm going to finish off my coverage of the FTX Cup by showing you the two tiebreak games played between Praggnanandhaa and Carlsen. So these were two Blitz games. I'm going to show you both games in two separate videos. So time control, 5 minutes plus 3 seconds for each move they make. First game, Carlsen had white. And I think this game shows, particularly in Blitz games, if you get the opening wrong, how it is very difficult to recover from that. Carlsen tries this hybrid between the Grand Prix attack and the Rossolimo. Now, he's played this before and done reasonably well with it. But Pragg knows exactly what to do against it. First of all, knight d4 is really sensible. I mean, basically, I feel that bishop b5 is kind of it's like a positional trick, really. And I've tried this, and if you get lucky, your opponent might play g6, and then you snap off that knight as quickly as possible. And basically, you've got yourself a beautiful Grand Prix attack, where it's certainly favourable for white to exchange off that knight. You never get hassled with a knight coming to d4. Very favourable Grand Prix attack. But Pragg, well, he wasn't born yesterday. Well, he was practically, but anyway, he knows exactly what to do and plays knight d4. Knight f3 from Carlsen. And now it's possible for black to simply exchange here. And very often this reaches some kind of, well, it looks a bit like a bishop b5 check Sicilian, actually. Something like this. And then black can play e5 and so on. But there's a sort of hybrid between a knight orphan and a bishop b5 check Sicilian. I mean, that's perfectly playable for black. But Pragg plays e6. And this is a move with a good reputation. There's a little trick here, it's quite nice. If knight takes knight, the knight goes back, and then queen g5. Oof! Hits bishop and g-pawn, very nasty. Carlsen castled, a6, and I feel that already black is pretty comfortable here. If bishop c4, then of course b5 only helps black. So the bishop comes to d3. Now that just doesn't look right, does it? The bishop blocking this pawn. Carlsen has had success with this before. In Zagreb, not too long ago, Vasiliv played knight e7, and after this, well, Carlsen got a decent position with white. But instead, I think Pragg plays a good move. He just put the knight back on c6. I know it seems that, it's funny, there's a lot of toing and froing here. But it's just a good move. It leaves the bishop looking a bit silly on d3. Now Carlsen played bishop e2. And what he wants to do is to go back into a normal open Sicilian. So for example, after knight f6, in fact very quickly, we transpose into an absolutely normal Scheveningen position after, well, d6 here or queen c7. I mean, absolutely standard position. So that's kind of a threat. I mean, it just leads back into a normal position. But Pragg doesn't want that. Scheveningen, obviously not his thing, and he puts the knight back on d4. And why not? Because white certainly doesn't want to exchange here, because the knight will have to go back to a poor square. And there's always the possibility to exchange off knight for bishop, which could be quite nice for black. So Carlsen puts the bishop back on d3, and lo and behold, we're repeating the position. And Pragg puts the knight back on c6. So this is kind of a tacit draw offer, which I suppose if you're playing with black is not a bad outcome. But that's not Carlsen's cup of tea. And instead of putting the bishop back on e2 and repeating after this, he plays b3 after a few seconds thought. But this is very comfortable for black. And in fact, it's all been played before. Now I wonder if Pragg realised that. I suspect he might have known this actually. You know, these kids have time to prepare their openings. You know, they know a lot of opening theory. This just looks a little bit odd to me with the bishops here. You know, white needs that dynamic pawn break d4 to really make anything of this position. But here, well, I mean, this has been played before. Grishuk against Dreyev went e5, which looks to shut out this bishop. But actually, white was doing pretty well after this. And I know it looks rather long-winded, but actually got in d4. And with the two bishops, white is doing pretty well there. But Pragg played much better. He took precisely 1 second, played g6. Good move. There's absolutely no need to fix the centre with e5. Now, it's possible to play knight d5 here. Because with the rook on e1, that could be rather nice for white. But after this, well, lots of pieces are exchanged. And that looks about equal. I mean, it's a safe way for white to play. But certainly nothing to write home about. So Carlsen, well, he thought for a little bit and played e5. An exchange of pieces. Now, I think it's time for you to answer a question. How do you play here if you had black? Black to play. If you know the game, well, that's pretty pointless. But maybe you've forgotten already. Anyway, what would you do with black in this position? Cheers. Time for a slurp of tea. Well, again, Pragg played extremely quickly here. He wasn't fazed by this at all. If the rook is knocked back with the bishop, actually white can be pretty happy with that, because then this bishop does look good on this diagonal. Both bishops look pretty good. And the queen could come to f3, and yeah, that's a bit uncomfortable with that pawn on g6. Don't like that, weakens all the dark squares. Instead, Pragg just invested a pawn. Very sound decision, very sensible. Well, dare I say it, very pragmatic. The bishop covers the dark squares. It does offer a pawn, which Carlsen took. I mean, if the rook retreats, I mean, then really, white has nothing in this position. This bishop will reach the long diagonal, and black is, well, more than comfortable in that position. Could be better. Carlsen, not one to back down from a challenge, snapped off the pawn. Knight d7, rook c4. And this rook already looks very strange on the 4th rank. Knight e5 hits the rook, hits the bishop. And incredibly, this has all been played before. It's quite possible that Pragg knew this. In a couple of games, white played rook e4 and black took here. Well, already I think black is doing pretty well, although remarkably, white scored 1.5 half from this position. Two bishops. I mean, once the bishop reaches the long diagonal, whoops, that long diagonal, looks really nice for black. But instead of rook e4, Carlsen played knight e2. So he's pinning here. So knight takes bishop, bishop takes g7. Which I suppose doesn't look bad. And yeah, knight takes rook, bishop takes g7. I mean, obviously, tremendous compensation for white with the two bishops. But Pragg played really sensibly, and he wasn't interested in taking the rook. He played knight f3 check. So that was taken, and then bishop takes b2, and the bishop came back. So after all that, white is a pawn up. However, black has the two bishops, and look at white's kingside. Oof, that's really ugly. That's really ugly. I mean, I suppose you could say Carlsen has what he wants. He's got an interesting position on the board with white. He might be able to outplay his opponent, but Pragg, I think, would have been absolutely delighted with this position. As I said, particularly in a blitz game, when you get the opening right, it is very hard for your opponent to change the nature of the struggle. This is simply easier for black to play than white. Here you'd like to invest some time to try and find some tricky idea to, maybe complicate. That is really hard in a blitz game, and this rook looks so oddly placed on the fourth rank. Where does it come to? Rook here and back to g2 also looks really strange. And what does white do with this extra pawn on the queen side? It's very hard to make anything of it. Bishop d7 from Pragg. Of course, he wants to use these two bishops. And there's always the threat to come here. So the rook came back to e3, a very strange position. And here black has so many good ideas. Praggnanandhaa played very sensibly. He just played e5. You could also play f5. I quite like that, to take away the e4 square from white. You could also play your queen out to the king side. Also looks very attractive. But anyway, e5, very sensible. I mean, there's no need to kind of reinvent the wheel here. Rook b8 just takes it very steadily. And now the queen comes over to the king side. Why not? Bishop d5. So in playing c4, Carlsen at least finds an anchor for this excellent minor piece in the middle of the board. The bishop does look strong. But Pragg just plays around it. It's very nice. Queen e1. So, maybe looking to get some play here on the e-file. f5. Very straightforward. Pawns look really good. King h1. Yeah, about time that king tucked itself in the corner, away from a stray check here. Now, one could, with black, play, I quite like this, f4. And just play the rook up to g5. That looks really dangerous. Pragg he played it really calmly, actually. And I think this is really impressive. He didn't rush it. He played the pawn to b6. Interesting. With the simple idea that he wanted to bring his rook over to the e-file. If you have a look in this position, I'm sure Carlsen was desperate to sack an exchange here, which would have, certainly put him right back in the game. But rook e8, so really calm play from Pragg. Just protecting that e-pawn. Queen g1 from Carlsen. Suddenly thinking, I ought to defend my king side. Bishop h6. Hitting this one. And, black has lots of attractive ideas here. If that rook moves, here's a nice idea. Bishop f4. And rook here. And rook g7. With the idea of just advancing the g-pawn up the board and opening up the g-file. It's really dangerous. But Carlsen didn't bother moving the rook. He just played b4. He wants a plan. He wants a straightforward plan. That's what you need in a blitz game. And clearly wasn't worried about ditching the exchange because, at least he's got rid of those two bishops. And you never know, at some moment, black's king might be a little bit insecure. Reasonable idea, but in fact Pragg just continued on the king side, really sensible. If that's closed, then the g-pawn could well advance, very much like it in a King's Indian. Carlsen took. Queen takes. Looks great for black. I mean, maybe Carlsen should compromise and play queen e3 here. And hope to get some play on the queen side with his majority. But instead, well, he's not one for backing down. And he swiped off that pawn. But this was cavalier. And after queen takes d2, the situation now is absolutely critical for white. The queen enters the position. Queen takes knight threatened, and after knight e4, queen d3 hits the f pawn and hits that rook. Not good. And here white is just lost, really. Prag's technique was very good. I quite like this. You know, he didn't rush it. He maintained his coordination. You know, there's a kind of temptation to, you know, move in with a rook or something, but actually he keeps them connected and just swiped off a pawn. I like this. Very sensible. Queen d4 check. And now bishop b3. A tricky little move. You know, he doesn't want that pawn to advance. He's just going to take here. It's a really interesting play. Rook e4, queen d1 check, king g2, bishop c2. So that bishop does enter the game very nicely, and coordination maintained at the other end of the board. And this is going to be winning because, well, sooner or later there's going to be a devastating check here. Or if, let me see, if rook e3, yes, bishop f1 is going to win. Queen d2 check is also winning. It's really over. So Carlsen ditched the second rook, but this does not improve his position. Rook d8, excellent move. That bishop is basically the only piece that's holding white's position together. So Pragg thinks, right, let's whip it off. There you go, job done. Good technique. Now the rook can invade pretty safely. h5, yeah. With black's pieces dominating, you can advance pawns like this. King g7 protects the g pawn. And the king is going to hide on h6, there's no bother there. Now, no doubt there are attacking moves here which are very strong, possibly h4, but Pragg just makes sure that nothing is going on. Just brings the rook back to cover the king and also stop that pawn advancing, or making sure it's never going to advance. And in fact, he's just tidying it up. Very sound play. In a blitz game, you just don't want to deal with any nonsense at all. And after this, yeah, he gives up his e-pawn, no problem. The queen switches back and he's ready to come in with a check on the second rank. Queen d5, he doesn't even bother with that. Rook e7, super solid. You know, he just makes sure nothing is going to happen to him. h4, queen e5, yep. Queen exchange will make life even easier. Check, another check. Rook e2 finally. King is safe on h6, queen a8. Well, still got to think about that. So queen e4 check is a good response, making sure the queens are exchanged. And here, Magnus Carlsen resigned, because after the queen exchange, that's even easier for black. You come in with your king and advance the pawns, and you put your rook on the second, and there is no way out for white there. Excellent game by Praggnanandhaa. Yeah, I know it's just a blitz game, but I was impressed, first of all, by his opening knowledge. He really knew this extremely well. I know it's a sideline, but it helps to know that. In fact, this is my recommendation for the Anti-Sicilians course that I'm working on at the moment. This game will feature. And, well, I think he just dealt with the middle game beautifully, held the advantage, and his technique was, I think, flawless, actually. So that meant that Carlsen had to win the second Blitz game to get to an Armageddon. And I'll show you in another video what happened in that one. Thanks for watching.